All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor for Tafshin Pei, the Tilson family of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos this year as a zechus for besoros tavos for all of Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsor for Tishrei of this year, Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Peretz, Moshe ben Avram, David Zichron Livracha, and Shindin Avram Kelman, also of Eretz Yisrael, in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kelman, and Alexander and Frederica David Zichron Livracha. A week of learning sponsors, Greg and Rachel Levitan of Eretz Yisrael, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Greg's mother, Esther Levitan, Esther Bas Herschel Zichron Livracha, and Svi and Shane Bishir in the Schos Refuah Shlema for Tinok ben Miriam. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all of those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should return our precious hostages b'shalom and b'karov, and should allow our holy soldiers to be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. So we'll say with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Today's daf is Kuf Yud Gimel 113. So we are picking up Emir Hashem on the top of 113. Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, mamish at the top line. So we'll say, so just to reorient ourselves a little bit. So if you remember again, we were talking about the concept, just the beginning of the sugya that we were dealing with is the concept that a husband inherits his wife. So we have effectively proven that, and it seems to be the primary pasuk for that is She'erozo Ishto, right? Or the Gemara quoted a number of different psukim. We actually were focusing a little bit more on Rabbi Shmuel. V'chol bas yoresh esnachala mimatos b'nei Yisrael. So again, the Torah tells us that if a woman inherits property, she has to marry into her father's tribe. Now, again, the outlying question that we still have to deal with, by the way, is that a halacha that she has to marry into her father's tribe? Is that a strong suggestion? Was that just a historical obligation? Is it a present obligation? When I say present, when we had greater tribal clarity, was it a present obligation again? So we'll see all of that in Meretz Hashem in the coming days. The Gemara says, so why does she have to go ahead and marry into her father's tribe? Because what are we concerned about? That if she predeceases her husband and her husband inherits her husband is going to move her tribal property to his tribe. So from here you see that halacha l'maisa, a husband inherits his wife. To which the Gemara essentially said, maybe not. Maybe the issue that we're concerned over here is not spousal inheritance, but rather what? Son's inheritance. That she's going to marry, right? This lady's going to marry a man from a different tribe. What's going to happen? They're going to have a son. Now, obviously, again, everyone agrees a son inherits his mother. Now, interestingly enough, if you remember again from a couple of days ago, as fascinating as this is, that is not an explicit pasuk, right? Where did we learn out that a son inherits his mother? Where did we learn out from? From the fact that a daughter inherits her mother, right? The Torah tells us that a daughter inherits her mother. So the L'maisa again, if the daughter does kal v'chomer, that the son does. Okay. So now maybe the concern over here is that a son will inherit his mother. So interestingly enough, the concern is the same. In other words, the concern is the same, namely that tribal property will be shifted from one shevet to another shevet. That's the primary concern. The shaila is who's doing the shifting, right? In other words, who's moving it? Is it the husband or is it the son? So that's the machlokas out of how to darshan the psukim. So now we're up to Kuf Yud Gimel Aleph 113a, top of the Amun. So says the Gemara, Tanya Idach, another brayso. So we'll say, so if you remember again, what was interesting is up until the end of yesterday's daf, the way the Gemara was set up was you held either one of two opinions, right? Either you held that it was the husband who was inheriting and therefore shifting the property from one tribe to another, or it was the son who was inheriting, shifting it from one tribe to another, and the psukim were interpreted in those ways respectively. Now the Gemara is quoting two braysos that seem to indicate maybe it's both. Maybe both. Maybe both a husband inherits and the son inherits. And therefore, again, what the Torah is highlighting is a series of psukim that highlight both of these concerns. That a woman, if she inherits property, has to marry into her father's tribe, lest the property be diverted to a different tribe, either by dint of husband or by son. So that's the Brayse says. Tanya Idach, Brayse says, so the Torah says, a woman should marry into the tribe of her father if she inherits land, in order not to move tribal land from one tribe to another tribe. Sorry. The Torah is talking about over here the concern that if she marries a man from another tribe and she predeceases that husband will end up moving tribal property from one tribe to another. So the Gemara says, Ato Omer. So I don't understand. You're saying that it's talking about, again, the movement of the husband, right? The husband will move it to a different tribe, but maybe not. Maybe it's talking about, again, that the son will move it to a different tribe. There's another pasuk. The pasuk says, you shall not move, you shall not move tribal inheritance from one tribe to another tribe. That's talking about inheritance of the son, right? Or that's talking about the ability of the son to potentially move tribal property from one shevet to another shevet. Harisivas haben amar ha ma'ani makayim velo tisov nachala mimata lamata acher. So what does it mean when the pasuk says, do not move tribal property from one tribe to another tribe? The pasuk must be talking about, ultimately, again, the husband moving property from one shevet to another. Okay? So the Gemara says as follows. So therefore, again, all we're doing over here, two different brises, right? So we quoted the first brisa in the end of yesterday's daf. So two different brises. And again, what both of these brises are highlighting is the concept that halacha l'maisa, you could have psukim which highlight both issues. Both the issue ultimately of marrying another man from another tribe, in which case, if she predeceases the husband could move the property to another tribe, or the other possibility also is that even if she doesn't predecease the husband, she dies, or whatever, she dies with children, her children will inherit her, and ultimately again move tribal property as well. Okay, to which the Gemara says, now, interestingly enough, here's what's interesting. Everyone seems to agree that the pasuk of "V'lo tisov nachala mimata lemata acher," right, which literally translated, "Do not move tribal property from one tribe to another tribe. Ki ish b'nachalaso yidbeku." Every person should stick with his tribe. Yidbeku matos b'nei Yisrael, should stick with his own tribe. Okay, which is an interesting pasuk by itself. We're not used to this type of tribal affiliations, right? We're just really not used to it. But it is fascinating to see that Torah Kedosha says, stick with your own tribe. Now again, it's sticking with your own tribe in terms of property, not sticking with your own tribe in terms of anything else. But in any event, the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, everyone agrees that this pasuk is talking about, again, the concern of a husband moving his wife's tribal property over to his tribe. So, right, both prices are interpreting this pasuk in the same way, namely, right, let's call it right, Rachel is the daughter of Reuven and Sarah, right? Reuven is from Shevet Reuven, Sarah's, right now we're not worrying about where Sarah's from, right? So now what happens? Reuven dies, Reuven has a daughter, Rachel's an only child, so Rachel inherits her father. So now Rachel owns tribal property in Shevet Reuven. Rachel meets a wonderful guy, Shimon, from Shevet Shimon. So Rachel wants to marry him. What does the Torah say? Please don't. Well, we're not sure if it's please don't or no, right? We're not sure exactly what the Torah is saying to Rachel, but the Torah is saying to Rachel, don't marry this guy. Why? Because the Lamaisa says if you marry him, at least in one sense, according to this pasuk, if you predecease him, Shimon from Shevet Shimon will inherit your property, and then it's going to turn out that property from Shevet Reuven is going to be transferred over to Shevet Shimon. So everyone agrees that this pasuk is talking about the ability of the husband to inherit his wife and move tribal property from one Shevet to another Shevet. By the way, why? Well, how do you know that pasuk is talking about the husband, right? Remember, I will say, there's no explicit mention of husband in that pasuk. There's also mention of son. We've now established that there are two ways that tribal property could be shifted from one tribe to another tribe, either from a husband inheriting his wife or a son inheriting his mother. So the Lamaisa, how do you know that this pasuk is talking about a husband inheriting his wife and shifting tribal property like that? How do we know that? Amra barav Shila, Amar Kra, Ish. Okay, that's pretty solid. So remember again, the pasuk says, "Ki ish benachalaso yidbeku." Ish, supposed to say ish, ishus is a reference ultimately again to a husband. So you see over here, there's a remez, that there's a scriptural allusion in the pasuk that Allah again is talking about marriage. The Gemara says, here's the problem: Tarvaihu ish ksivbehu. both of the psukim in question, ki ish b'nachalas mata avosa, right? Both say, there are two psukim, right? Pasuk number one, just to read you the psukim, right? Pasuk number one is Bamidbar, we'll go in order. Pasuk number one is Bamidbar Lamed Vav Zayin, chapter 36, verse 7. That's the pasuk we've been quoting the most this entire discussion, which is V'lotisav nachala l'bnei Yisrael mata al mata, ki ish b'nachalas mata avosav yidbeku, Bnei Yisrael. Okay, and then there is two psukim later. V'lo tisav nachala mimata lemata acher ki ish b'nachalaso yidbeku matos Bnei Yisrael. So two psukim. Now the Gemara says, but this first pasuk we're quoting must be talking about marriage. Why? Because it says ish. Small problem, says the Gemara. Both psukim say ish. They both say ish. So the Gemara says, Ella, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Amar Kra, Yidbeku. So I'll say here's the difference. In the first passage that we're quoting over here now, it says Yidbeku. Now both say that lashon of davak is reminiscent of marriage. Why? Because what does the pasuk say in Bereshis? Alkin yazov ish es avivis. A man will leave his mother and father, v'davak bi'ishto, and he will cling to his wife. There are two relationships in which the word dvekus is used. One is marriage, and the other is v'davak tavashem is by Kadosh Baruch Hu. The lashon of dvekus means to cling to something, to become one with something. So that's the lashon used by marriage, and the lashon used by our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That ultimately, again, the goal is dvekus. The Gemara says over here, in the passage that we're quoting over here, it says, Ki ish b'nachalaso yidbeku. So what's the lashon of dvekus, of davak? That's marriage. That's marriage. So from here you see that this pasuk is talking about, again, the concern that if Rachel marries Shimon from Shevet Shimon, she's going to move the tribal property from Ruvain over to Shimon. Okay. So the Gemara says, here's the problem once again. Tarvayu yidbeku ksivbehu. They both have the lashon of yidbak. So we'll say, so they both have lashon, both psukim have the lashon of ish, both psukim have the lashon of yidbak, of clinging. So how do you know that the one that we're referring to over here, of alotisav nachal mata lemata, is referring to marriage? So the Gemara says, Ela amar Rava amar Kra yidbeku matos. So last year we'll say, it says yidbeku and matos. Well, that's the phrase. Yidbeku matos. Ish benachalaso yidbeku matos b'nei Yisrael. Each person should cling to their mata. Now, if you take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment, the Rashbam, about 4 lines up from before it gets wide, matos, mashma bal, didvekas matos ayidei balhu. See, says, interestingly enough, the mata, the tribe, is determined by who? Determined by the husband. So therefore, again, the lashon over here if when you put this kind of all together, the pasuk has ish yidbeku matos, clinging and makos, so clinging a lashon of marriage, combined with matos. Who determines the mata? The husband. So therefore, again, make sure that when you cling in marriage to someone, he is of the same tribe of the origin of your tribal property. Okay, beautiful. Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi Amar Kra mimata lemata acher uben lav acherhu. So Rabbi said this is actually quite beautiful. So Rav Ashi comes along and Rav Ashi says it's simpler, right? The pasuk says that you shall not go ahead and shift the property. V'lo tisov nachala mimata lemata acher. Right? In other words, Torah is telling us, Rachel, you inherited tribal property from Ruvain. You should not marry someone from Shimon. Why? Lest you transfer it over lemata acher. Now, it's interesting. So the way Rav Ashi is understanding it over here is, how is that property transferred over? Through an acher. Who's the acher? The acher is the husband. Why can't the acher be a child? Because a son is never an acher. Right? And as well say, again, the truth is a marriage could dissolve. A marriage could dissolve, right? But the parent-child bond, the bond could be strained, right? But in other words, just because someone is your spouse now doesn't mean they're your spouse tomorrow, right? That relationship could be dissolved. The parent-child bond, right? It may be fractured, it may be frayed, it may be strained, but you can't dissolve it. Right? That always remains. So therefore, again, the Torah wouldn't use lashon of acher, which almost means like a separate and distinct entity by a child. You could use that lashon ultimately again by a spouse, by a husband, but not by a child. I will say there's a tremendous Musar Haskell in this phrase as well. What does the Torah tell us? Banim atem la'Hashem Elokeichem. We are children of the Ribono Shalom. So we'll say, wonder to yourself, what does it mean to be a son of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What does it mean? What does it mean? Banim atam la Hashem Elokeichem. And the Bava say, this is what it means. When you're a child, it means you have an undissolvable bond with the Ribono Shalom. It does not matter how much you sin. Now let me clarify that. It matters how much you sin, right? In other words, it definitely matters. But no matter how much I sin, I have an undissolvable bond with the Ribono Shel Olam. A ben lav acherhu. A ben can never become someone who is alien to the parent, no matter what happens. It's I would say this is the source of our strength and the source of our greatest simcha. At the end of the day, I am a ben. I will say, if you think about this in just a moment, this is the beautiful progression from Yamim Noraim into Sukkos. Right? Again, we have Sukkot, right? Yomim Noraim is all about the chait and all about shuv and all about these things. And a lot of times what ends up happening is I think and I contemplate and I introspect what I've done. And I think to myself, after everything that I've done, and it's not just this year, it's not just this year, right? It's the composite of my entire life, which very often I'm just unsatisfied with and disillusioned by and disappointed in. I'm upset that I'm getting to a point in my life now where potentially there's more years behind me than in front of me, and I have not done the things that I want to do. And I don't mean like I always wanted to see the Eiffel Tower. I don't mean stuff like that, right? I mean like real stuff, things that matter, things that actually matter in life. And I haven't gotten a chance to do it. And the reason I haven't gotten a chance to do it is because I self-sabotage all the time. I pull the rug out from under myself all the time. I make constant mistakes, and I same mistakes over and over and over, and I'm upset and I'm disillusioned. And of course, when that happens, right, when you're upset and disillusioned with yourself, you project it. And I assume that HaKadosh Baruch Hu probably wants nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. And amazingly enough, what happens? So I go through Yom Noraim. As long as even after Yom Noraim, you know, we'll say Yom Noraim has different effect on people. For some people, right, we feel like the cathartic effect of being forgiven and feel like 1,000,000 pounds lighter. And some people, the constant ongoing introspection makes me feel a little bit even more unworthy. It can happen. It's the wrong experience, but it can happen. What happens? So I guess I say this every year because it's my favorite dvar. The Sfas Emes brings down what's the minimum shir of a sukkah. Minimum shir of a sukkah is 2 walls, right? Shtei defano sumashu. Beautiful Sfas Emes that says, what is that? That's an embrace. If you think about it, like, right? Wall 1, wall 2, and wall 3. That's an embrace. The sukkah represents the embrace from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We spoke about this over Rosh Hashanah. Imagine for a moment that a child becomes estranged from a parent. No communication for 10 years. And before all those 10 years, the child was a train wreck, doing everything wrong, constant disappointment, all this kind of stuff. No contact for 10 years. The child shows up at the doorstep of the parent, right? What does the parent do? Right? The parent doesn't say, you know what, so nice to see you. We need to talk, right? We need to talk. What does the parent do? Grabs the child. Just grabs the child. I'll say, you know what Sukkos is? Sukkos is HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying, just stop. I love you. Ein ben nikra acher. You're my child. I got it. Maybe you've been away for a while. Maybe you've been doing a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not so happy with. Okay, I don't care. Just come here. Just let me hold you. Just let me hug you. Sometimes, like, we're so hard on ourselves, and we think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't love us because a lot of times we don't love ourselves. So maybe we don't love ourselves, and that's something we have to work on. But no matter how we feel about ourselves, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is madly in love with us. He's consumed by us. He can't get enough of us. All he wants to do is hold us in his embrace and just look at us like that parent who is just so happy that the child showed up and says, okay, we'll talk about everything else later. Right now, just let me hug you. That's the sukkah. Sukkah is the embrace. Why? Because the Gemara says, uben lav acherhu. A child never becomes an alien. A child never becomes a stranger. That bond is always there. Banim atem la'Hashem Elokeichem, I will say, reminds us that no matter what we do or we don't do, the love that the Ribono Shel Olam has for us is overwhelming. And all he asks of us is just show up at the door. In this case, just walk into the sukkah. Just show up at the door so I can hug you. That's all. Just come back. I just want to hug you. But I can't. You need to come in order for me to hug you. Just show up and the embrace is going to be so beautiful, incredible, all in one little line of Gemara. All right, I'm Rabbi Yavo. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yanai. Back to Yerusha. I'm a Rabbi. Umataba mishmeid Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. Minayin lebal she'ino notel b'reiki b'mochzak. We'll say, so how do we know? This is actually very interesting. Okay, so the halachas of Yerusha in general have this distinction between roi and mochzak. Roi. So let's take a typical case, even of regular Yerusha. So when someone passes away, there's two different buckets of property that they have at the time of their passing. There's the stuff that they actually own, they actually have possession of. That's called muhsak. You have money in your accounts, right? You have property that you own. And that's called muhsak. And then there's roi. Roi is the stuff that you're entitled to. The simplest example of that is, right, Reuven dies, and Reuven lent $1 million to Shimon. Right? He lent $1 million to Shimon, and the debt is payable 6 months from now. So that's called roi. That's not money. So Reuven didn't have that money at the time of his death, but it's owed to him. It's owed to him. So now Rabbi Yavo said to Rabbi Yochanan, when a husband inherits his wife, how do we know that a husband only inherits that which the wife currently possessed at the time of her death and does not inherit any of the entitled possessions, right? Stuff that is coming to the wife. This is very important. Shenemar. So as I say, where do we know this from? So if you take a quick look, by the way, at the Rashbam says over here. The Rashbam says over Barai. Actually, we could Barai. Just to go. Kigon Shemese Ishto V'Achar Meis Aviha Denachalo Zu Ruya La Ilu Haisa Kayemes Minayin Shlo Yarash Ela Krovei Mitzalav. So as I see here, this is important. Now watch this. Reuven's married to Rachel. Now Rachel happens to be an only child. Okay, so now Rachel has a father, we'll call him Yaakov, right? So now Rachel's only child. So now when Rachel predeceases her husband Reuven, so Reuven inherits her. Now, interestingly enough, Rachel is entitled to certain property. What is Rachel entitled to? Well, one day, if her father dies, so now obviously, if Yaakov, Rachel's father, died before Rachel, so Rachel inherited the property, which means now that when Rachel dies, who's going to get it? Reuven, her husband. Let's say when Rachel unfortunately predeceased her father. So now what happens? Rachel dies. So now, technically speaking, there is an inheritance that is coming to Rachel when her father Yaakov dies, right? So that inheritance, that is called roi. That is called something that Rachel doesn't have now, but Rachel, who has now passed away, Rachel will be entitled to in the future, right? So Rachel dies. When Rachel's father Yaakov later dies, that property will come down her way. How do we know that Reuven, the husband, doesn't get that? Right? The only thing that a husband inherits from his wife is the stuff that she currently owns at the time of her death. But other technical entitlements do not come to the husband via Yerusha. So go back to the Rashi, first wide line. So for example, again, Reuven's married to Rachel. First Rachel died, and then Rachel's father Yaakov died. Had Rachel been alive, she would have inherited her father. So he says, so we'll say, now let's say, interestingly enough, in this case, so how do I know that halacha l'maisa, when Yaakov dies, so Reuven, the son-in-law, doesn't inherit him. Rather, who will this property go to? Well, if Rachel had a son, it'll go to Rachel's son, because that's how inheritance law works. If the person who's supposed to inherit is gone, that person's heirs inherit in their stead. So in this case, either the property will go to either Rachel's son, or if Rachel had other siblings, right, then it could potentially go to them as well. Okay, let's say there were other sisters, it could go to them as well. So how do I know again? But the point over here is, who is it not going to? Who is it not going to? It's not going to Reuven, Rachel's husband. Right? So that's what it means. Husband inherits in muchzak, that which Rachel owns, but Reuven does not inherit roi, that which Rachel is technically entitled to later on. Okay, fine. And Rashi just gives muchzak definition also. Good. So let's go back. So the Gemara says, Shneimar, I'll tell you how, because the pasuk says, Uskuv holiness Yair, Vayihilo Esrim v'shalosh aram ba'aretz hagilad. So also remember again, the pasuk said that Skuv had a son Yair, and Yair, interestingly enough, had 23 cities in the Gilad. Now we've spoken about this many times. How does Yair have property that his father Skuv didn't have? Minayin liyar shlo hayilo l'Skuv. How did Yair have property that his father Skuv didn't have? Elamelamed shenasa Skuv isha. Rather, I must see that Skuv married a woman. Skuv married a woman, right? So what happened? It must be like this. So Skuv was married to a woman. We're just going to call her woman because I can't think of a good parallel female name for Skuv, right? So let's go. Right? Skuv was married to a woman, right? So then what happens? So now woman predeceases Skuv. Now woman had a father. Right? And let's assume that woman was the only child to her father. So now what ended up happening? This is fascinating. So now woman predeceases Skuv. So what happens when wife predeceases Skuv? What happens? Skuv inherits her. The problem is that when woman died, her father was still alive. So then sometime later on, what ends up happening? So wife's father dies, and Abba says, where does that property go? Oh, so that property went to Yair, who was the son of Skuv and his wife, meaning that's called Ra'i property. So you see from here that Ra'i property doesn't go to the husband, but rather Ra'i property ultimately again will go to the inheritor of the wife, which in this case again is the son. So the Gemara says, so from here the Gemara is just using this as a proof that when a husband inherits, he only inherits property that the wife owns at the time of her death, does not inherit any entitlements to future property. Okay, so future property will go to a different one of her heirs, most directly her son. The Gemara says furthermore, the Gemara gives another example. Elazar ben Aaron meis vayikbaru also. So remember again, the pasuk says Elazar ben Aaron died, right? Elazar dies, and where did they bury him? They buried him in the Givah, in the valley that was owned by Pinchas. So once again, how did Pinchas have property that his father Elazar didn't have? Malamed shenasa Elazar isha. Also, Elazar married a woman, right? So Elazar had a wife. Now let's say again, Elazar's wife also had a father, right? And Elazar's wife was in line to inherit her father. Now, Elazar's wife predeceased her father. As a result, what happens? Umeisa b'chaye morisha, umeisa morisha v'yarsha Pinchas. So what ends up happening? So Elazar's wife predeceased her father. So Elazar inherited her, but only inherited whatever she possessed at the time of her death. Subsequently, Elazar's wife's father, his father-in-law, died. Where did that property go to? That property went to Elazar's wife's son, Pinchas. So the additional property that Pinchas had was his grandfather's property that he inherited in lieu of his mother, because he stood instead of his mother. So you see from here, the Gemara says, what do you see from here? You see from here that once again, Rabbi says, it's actually very simple. All the Gemara is trying to highlight over here is a husband only inherits that which the wife owns at the time of her death, does not inherit what we call roi, anything that she is technically entitled to through other inheritance relationships. So the Gemara says, Ma'ava Omer, why do you have to bring in that second pasuk? Because you want to thought maybe in the Yair case, right? Maybe in the Yair case, the property that he owned that his father Skuv didn't have, maybe that's not property that he got from his grandfather, but rather what? Maybe it's property. Maybe Yair himself was married and his wife predeceased him and he inherited her. Maybe that's where it came from. Tamalomar ve'Elazar ben Aaron meis. Therefore, the pasuk comes along and quotes this case by Aaron, by Elazar and Pinchas. But maybe by Pinchas, like we saw before, maybe Pinchas didn't inherit property from his maternal grandfather, but rather, again, what happened by Pinchas is cherem vows. Remembering we saw this in yesterday's daf, you make something cherem, it becomes the property of the Kohanim. Maybe that's where Pinchas got his fields from. Amrikra bino nachala haru'uyalo v'yarshavino. No, it has to be. The fact that it says bino, his son, means that we're talking about property that technically, again, was fit for the father. Meaning, technically speaking, had Elazar's wife owned it at the time of his death, Elazar would have acquired it, v'yar shabano, but instead his son acquired it. Okay, so we'll say, so bottom line, what comes out from this entire sugya, a couple of important things. Number one, a husband inherits his wife. That's really what we've established. We've also established ultimately, again, that a son inherits his mother. That we already established 2 sugyas ago. What we also now understand is this mandate that when a woman inherits property, to marry into her own tribe, in order not to move property to different tribes. There are 2 different ways that property can move tribally, either again through a husband or through a son. Now, is that a mandate? Is it an Eitzah Tova? Is it a mitzvah? Is it an obligation? That still remains. We still have to see exactly what that is. What we've also just now seen is another very important piece in inheritance law, that although we've established that a husband inherits his wife, what does he inherit? Only what we call muhsak. Only the stuff that she has at the time that he died, that she has physical possession of. Any entitlements he does not acquire. We'll say, by the way, if this sounds familiar, it's because we've had it before. Where else does this halacha apply? Pishnayim, the double portion for a bechar. A bechar only gets double portion in muchzak, in that which his father actively owns at the time of his death. Like, for example, children inherit everything, right? They inherit what their parent owns and any entitlements that they have also. But bechar, the bechar's double portion is only in what the father actually owns at the time of his death, and not for any right, not for any entitlements. Okay, beautiful. Let's go back there. Bnei achos. Remember again, sons of sisters inherit. So what is this? Tana bnei achos v'lo benos achos. So what does this mean? The sons of sisters and not the daughters of sisters. So first the Gemara says, so what are we talking about over here? We'll say what case are we referring to over here? So Amar of Sheshes lekadem. We're talking about again precedents. So we'll say, so what does this mean? So take a look at Rashbam. Tap Rashbam, Kof Yud Gimel, base 113b. L'may halchusa, memait lehu hai vada yarshos achi iman shahari habas yarashes. So just to illustrate what this case is over here. Remember again, we're setting up a hierarchy of inheritors, right? So kind of what we have over here is you're going to have, right, a son is an inheritor, a husband is an inheritor, a father is an inheritor, and siblings are inheritors. Now again, the direct order of all this, we're going to frame Emir Hashem. So let's say we're talking about a situation where, let's say again, we'll call it Ruvain dies, right? And Ruvain's father has already passed away, and Ruvain has no children. So who's going to inherit Ruvain? Who's going to inherit Ruvain? His siblings. Let's say Ruvain has sisters. So his sisters are going to go ahead and inherit him. Now let's say, remember what I just said before, the way it works with inheritance is, let's say the person who is in line to inherit passed away. So their inheritance chelek is acquired by their children. So let's say, for example, Ruvain passes away, and Ruvain has two sisters, right? Rachel and Leah. So now let's say again, Rachel and Leah passed away also. Right, they passed away also. But Rachel and Leah left behind children. Their children inherit in their stead, and therefore will inherit the portion of their now deceased brother, Ruvain. Okay, so we'll say, so what the Gemara seems to be saying is like this, that who inherits the uncle? So essentially what we're saying is that nieces and nephews, right, or I should say according to the Mishnah, nephews inherit their uncle, right? That if the uncle passes away, there's no father, right? The uncle's father passed away, the uncle has no kids, so the uncle's siblings, right, Reuben's siblings, Rachel and Leah, are going to inherit him. If Rachel and Leah passed away, and Rachel and Leah left behind sons, their sons will inherit Reuben, their uncle. So now the Gemara makes a statement, it's only nephews and not nieces. Gemara says, what does that mean? Why would it be nephews and not nieces? To which the Gemara says, Amrav Sheishes lekadem. What it means is like this. Both lekadem sheyiktemu habanim lebanos liyaresh estodein de'afinu lekama mirusha rishona. Both say, listen to this. What it means is like this. That let's say Rachel and Leah passed away, and Rachel and Leah left behind sons and daughters. So now what happens? So now Ruvain, their brother, passes away. In other words, there's Ruvain, Rachel, and Leah, 3 kids in the family, right? So now Rachel and Leah married, had children, right? They had boys and girls, sons and daughters. Okay. Now Reuven later on passes away. By the time Reuven passes away, Reuven has never married, didn't have children, right? Didn't have children, and his father also passed away. So who's going to inherit Reuven? Rachel and Leah. Rachel and Leah passed away already. So therefore, again, their inheritance right passed down to their children. So now the Mishnah says their sons, the sons of Rachel and Leah, inherit their uncle. So the Gemara says their sons, but not their daughters. Why would their daughters? Why would the nieces not inherit their uncle? To which the Gemara says, you're right. The nieces do inherit, but the sons inherit before the nieces. The sons are first position inheritors, or I should say the nephews are first possession inheritors before the nieces. The Gemara says, okay, let's analyze this. Tani Rabbi Shmuel Silber Kamed Rav Huna, which also means essentially that if there are nephews, the nephews get the Yerusha before the nieces get the Yerusha. So the Gemara says, Tani Rabbi Shmuel Silber Kamed Rav Huna, V'yarash, the pasuk says V'yarash, you will inherit. So both say this is the part they're talking about over here. That if there are no brothers, you give to the closest surviving relative, which in this case would be the sisters. V'yarash Makish Yerusha Shnia, the Yerusha Rishona. We compare literally again secondary inheritance to primary inheritance. Now, we'll say, now what does this mean? What is the case of primary inheritance? Case of primary inheritance? Children inheriting a parent. That is the case of primary inheritance. How does it work in primary inheritance? How does it work? How does it work? Sons come before daughters. So we'll say, what's the case of secondary inheritance? Pretty much any other case. Any other case. So the Gemara said, "Ma Yerusha Rishona ben kodim lebas." Just like in the case of primary inheritance, a son comes before a daughter. Af Yerusha Shnia ben kodim lebas. So too in secondary inheritance, son comes before the daughter as well. So in other words, we'll both say, and we've seen this already before. In any case of inheritance, there's a model. What's the model? Sons come before daughters. That's the model. Which also, by the way, just as an estate planning idea, which is actually very important, because if a person does have sons and daughters, and you want your children to share equally in the estate, you must engage in halachic estate planning, and you must. There are halachic mechanisms to allow for the equitable division of your estate amongst your children, however you want it. But if you don't do that, and a person passes away, even if you have a legal will, halacha kicks in, and halacha says that inheritance is divided up a certain way, and it's sons before daughters. So essentially, if a person wants their daughters to go ahead, make sure that you seek out a good estate attorney who understands halacha, who knows how to structure your estate documents, that you could give your children what you want them to have without chas v'shalom contradicting halacha. Incredibly, it's not a commercial. If you want people, I have someone who I've used. I'm not going to tell you after this year, right? But Lamaisa, there are some very great people who are mumchim in this. They know what to do. They know how to do it. It is a halachic obligation. Because also, if you just write a regular will and you do not have a halachic mechanism in it, understand what you are doing is you are contradicting Torah law. The last thing you want after 120, when you're in the shamas front of the Beis Din Shalmala and they're reading your will, and your will is not in accordance with halacha, you don't want that. You don't want that. It is easy. It is easy enough. All it requires is using the right kind of attorney and getting it done. Don't wait. So the Gemara says as follows. So Lamaisa again, so we see conceptually that secondary Yerusha, which is any case other than parents and children, follows primary Yerusha. Just like by primary Yerusha, it's sons before daughters, so too in any case of inheritance, if there are sons are going to come before daughters. Therefore, again, applying this back to this case where Uncle Reuven died, Uncle Reuven didn't have kids, so Uncle Reuven's estate goes to his sisters, Rachel and Leah. Rachel and Leah died, but they left behind children, sons and daughters. So again, so Rachel and Leah's sons will inherit their uncle's estate before their daughters. Okay, Tan Rabbi Rav Chinna, Kamed Rav Nachman. V'haya b'yom anchilu as banav. So another halacha over here. Very interesting. It'll be on the day that b'yom anchilu as banav, on the day that ultimately, again, you cause your sons to inherit. So this is talking about, again, this is in Parshas Kiseitze, about, it's right after the section of the Yifas Toar, having a son that you like, having a son that you don't like. If the Bechar is the Bechar, is the Bechar. And therefore, again, you can't go ahead and override. But the other thing for estate planning is if you have a halachic Bechar, right? If you have a halachic firstborn son, understands that halachically he gets pishnayim, he gets a double portion. If you don't want that, in other words, if you want your children to share in your estate equitably, again, there are halachic mechanisms to do so. But once again, if you leave a will that says I want all of my kids to share equally, and you have a halachic bechar, that's a real problem. That's a real problem. That means that your will is contradicting biblical law. Not a good thing to go into the Olam HaEmes with. So therefore, again, seek out that estate, halachic estate planning. So anyway, the pasuk says, it'll be on the day that you bequeath your property to your children. So what do you see from here? That you could allocate inheritance by day and not by night. Now, what does that mean? I'm going to Abaye. What does that mean? That if you die by day, your children inherit you, but if you die by night, your children don't inherit you? Does that make any sense? To which the Gemara says, no. Dilma din nachalos amris. No. We're talking about the adjudication I don't know if adjudication is the right word over here, but adjudication of the estate. In other words, when do you adjudicate matters of the estate? So the Gemara says, so now perhaps what we're saying is like this. V'hayo b'yom anchilu esbanav means, b'yom hatamapil nachalos, you could go ahead and adjudicate matters of the estate by day, but you don't adjudicate matters of the estate at night. Where does this come into us? It's very simple. Let's at least begin this. Tisanya, v'haisalab bnei Yisrael chukas mishpat. So we'll say, interestingly enough, Torah speaks out the idea that it calls Yerusha, the laws of inheritance, chukas mishpat, right? It calls it ultimately again, literally again, a statute of law, chukas mishpat. So the Gemara says, Ora kala parsha kula lihios din, telling us that halacha l'maisa, the laws of inheritance are treated like din, are treated like any other adjudication of law. Now we'll say, what does that mean, treated like an adjudication of law? When do you adjudicate legal cases? When? Only by day. Only by day, right? Beis Din only adjudicates law by day, not at night. So therefore, the fact that the Torah goes ahead and calls the laws of Yerusha, the laws of inheritance, a mishpat, ultimately tells us that halacha l'maisa again could only be done by day, not at night. So we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up Emiras Hashem with Rabbi Yehuda tomorrow. Tremendous stuff. Shkoyach, a good Narav Yom Tov, a good Shabbos. Shkoyach. All right, Chavra on Zoom. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful Yom Tov. Chavra in Eretz Yisrael. I see Reb Jerry's already in his sukkah. Reb Jonathan looks like he's in his sukkah also. Mamish, incredible. Alan is somewhere in Bnei Brak. Reb Greg looks like in the dining room. Let's see, okay, all the Chavra in Eretz Yisrael, incredible. Pinchas, beautiful. Baruch Hashem, it's supposed to have so many Chavra in Eretz Yisrael. Halavai, still time. Maybe we'll be able to join you. All right.